week and what it means. Our panel of super friends, South Seattle Emerald founder and Seattle Times columnist, Marcus Green. Welcome back, Marcus.
Thank you for having me.
From Q13, both political analyst C.R. Douglas and correspondent Brandi Kruse. Welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me and CR.
Right. Colleagues, good to have you back on. And being TV folks, Brandi and CR are unfazed by the fact that you can watch us at facebook.com/KUOW Public Radio or at youtube.com/user/KUOW949. Let's get into it. The amount of money you pay for your annual car tabs, it's not coming down to $30. Washington voters said they wanted that to happen. They passed a state ballot initiative last year, sponsored by our most famous anti-tax activist, Tim Eyman. This week, Brandi, the state Supreme Court overturned the initiative. Why did it do that?
So this is kind of what we expected for two reasons. One, the simplest way I could put it is that the ballot title they found to be not exactly representative of what was actually in it. And then also that it contained too many subjects. And so the state Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional.
Deceptive and misleading, they said about the ballot title. The state attorney general's office, Bob Ferguson's office, writes the ballot title. And Ferguson said, well, it's not my office's fault. It was pulled word for word from Eyman's initiative, and he requested that title on the ballot. But why does the AG have to put deceptive language on my ballot? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Well, can I jump in on that one? He doesn't, and I think this is a real problem. It seems to me ridiculous that we litigate something all the way to the Washington State Supreme Court about ballot language. I mean, to the extent that there was some ambiguity in that, it could have actually been cleared up by one or two words. There should never be a situation where we're litigating a confusing ballot title. You have plenty of time between the AG and the petitioner, to figure out a language that works. Have a focus group look at it. Have a bunch of people look at it. Figure out if it's confusing. I mean, that we have wasted so many resources on this and other initiatives about ballot title ambiguity seems to me so avoidable.
Yeah, and especially when you have somebody like Attorney General Bob Ferguson, who often lauds the skills of his attorneys at his office, and who has been so critical of Tim Eyman in the past for having initiatives that don't stand up to constitutional muster. You think they'd really give it a good hard look to figure out, are we sending something that's sound to voters? I agree with CR, waste of time, waste of money, waste of voter effort, and it leaves voters right before an election, people who did support $30 car tabs, feeling like, well, why does my vote matter? Because I voted for $30 car tabs, I didn't get it. And so, I just think it is a bad effect all around. These things should be checked beforehand.
Just to fill in some detail on the misleading, the title said that the initiative would roll back car tab fees except voter-approved charges, except the Supreme Court found, no, it would also roll back car tab fees that voters had previously approved. So that was part of the misleadingness. Marcus, any reaction to this state Supreme Court voiding of the car tabs initiative?
No, just like as Brandi was saying, I mean, it wasn't so surprising. I mean, and especially knowing that this is the third time actually that this has happened where Tim Eyman has had a successful initiative, only to see it either partially or fully rejected by the Supreme Court. I was talking to my mother the other day, and I said there are three certainties in life: death, taxes, and that Tim Eyman will try to lower those taxes with an initiative. So I'm pretty sure that he's going to.
Two things that he's going to lower. Good one.
Yeah.
Okay, well, our governor is pleased with the ruling, although he says the voters do have a point.
The state Supreme Court sort of blew the whistle on Tim Eyman on, trying to do something that was illegal, unconstitutional. But having said that, look, we understand the frustration of people about car tabs, and I think that we should be open to some reforms of car tabs.
Anyone know what kind of car tab reform is coming our way, or if that's true?
Well, I think that something that is kind of obvious low-hanging fruit on this front, which has been kind of stalled in the legislature for several years, is cleaning up how we value cars, because your car tab is the state portion is based on the value of your car. And there is all kinds of frustration over the value table that Sound Transit uses, that the state uses. There's arguments that inflates car values, and that, in the real world, cars depreciate faster than the schedule. I mean, there's almost widespread agreement that the car valuation part of it is broken, and that probably overinflates car values. I think at the very least, the legislature needs to look at that. I mean, when the public is on record, even if it is ruled unconstitutional, 53 to 47, whatever this initiative passed, I don't think you can completely ignore that. And that valuation schedule is one obvious thing I think the legislature will take up.
Can we just call that a legal contract, that whatever if the state overvalues my car, they've just promised to give me that much money for my used vehicle?
Yeah, cash for clunker. That program we had in the Obama years. Yeah, they have to buy your clunker at that inflated value.
So before we leave this, anybody want to tell us how this is going to affect our listeners? Besides the fact that their car tabs won't cost $30, how does it affect people that this initiative is overturned?
Well, I think in different ways, depending on where you live. And also, the mayor of Seattle was very happy about this. It gives them funding that she believes the city desperately needs. And so if you live in Seattle, a place where they did not vote for $30 car tabs, you're probably pretty happy about it. And you're going to start to see that money go back to where it was intended to go. But look, I don't think we can downplay how expensive car tabs are for people, especially right now. And I know there was a lot of people saying during the economic situation, it was easy. That's one of the things you could have done for people, is cut back on the cost of their car tabs. And that's why they call people, when they get pulled over for expired tabs, driving while poor. I mean, in a state that pretends to care about people who are underserved. I mean, gosh, trying to write a $600 check to renew the car tabs on your car, that's absurd, and then I think they've reformed laws around whether you can actually get in trouble to the extent of which you can get in trouble for driving with expired tabs. But, to me, they've got to figure out a way to bring it down.
The ACLU sued the state to stop suspending driver's licenses of people who haven't paid.
Right.
Any other reaction to that?
Well, just one other thing. I will predict that the state will not, other than maybe tinkering with the car valuation, do anything else. I mean, even though Iman and several others are calling for the governor to create a special session, come together, and even though this was thrown out, it was clear that what the voters wanted, $30 car tabs, all the rest. I think it's extremely unlikely that'll happen. I think it's extremely unlikely the legislature will implement anything near 30 when they reconvene. The difference is, last time this was on the ballot 20 years ago, it was thrown out. Gary Locke did convene a special session. They immediately, rolled things back to $30, saying, hey, that's the will of the voters. The difference this time is, I think lawmakers aren't as scared of Iman as they were. And listen, we're in this huge COVID, budget crisis. And, they're just not, there's no appetite for cutting state funding, given that especially.
Okay, now let's move to another spending of money by our local government. This week, Seattle's mayor announced who's on the committee that will recommend how to spend $100 million for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. Marcus, not all the activists in those communities are cheering this committee. Why is that?
No, well, there are certainly some people who believe that this actually is going to draw division within the community. I can tell you that the Black community isn't huge in Seattle. And so over the past 2 weeks, I had a slew of people who called me just, wanting me to serve as a sounding board. It seemed like you couldn't throw a rock in the Seattle's Black community without hitting somebody who had been asked to be on this task force. And one of their main areas of concern, it seemed like the consensus of concern, if you will, was that they did not want to be seen as window dressing or being tokenized for the mayor, and essentially, being, serving as a marketing tool or a pawn, if you will. And I will say that there, are definitely folks who have been listed on this task force who certainly do not have a reputation for being subservient. So I'll say that I think that they, very much are pretty gung ho about trying to serve, BIPOC communities. Although I will say, I mean, you look what happened with the rapper actor Ice Cube, who has gotten some backlash from the Black community for even, sitting down and considering President Donald Trump's so-called platinum plan. And I can say that I think some people's concerns are justified in the sense of the perception of being used as a political pawn for anyone, Democrat or Republican. In this case, obviously, it's a Democrat.
In Seattle, Marcus, would you tell us what the concern is about why they would, the concern among some people, as you said, there's a division, but what's the worry about being seen as window dressing or being tokenized? Are the opponents bringing evidence forward that this is not, that the task force doesn't have any real authority, or what?
Well, I think that one of their main concerns, and what was certainly drawn out by Sean Good, he wrote an op-ed for the Emerald, and he was for those who don't know, he was asked to be on the task force. He declined, saying that he would rather prefer, as some of the other activists, that the $100 million be parceled out via a sort of participatory budgeting process, which would actually have the quote unquote community decide on where this $100 million are going, as opposed to 28 people who were chosen by the mayor. They feel that that's a better way to ensure accountability versus simply just having 28 people who are handpicked by the mayor, who some people say may or may not have the community's best interest at heart. That's, of course, yet to be determined.
Brandi, in your reporting experience, have you found that task forces are window dressing? They get to give advice, but their advice doesn't translate to their priorities, or what?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times it amounts to red tape. We've had a lot of task forces in the past on homelessness, et cetera, and where has that got the city on the issue of homelessness? I think sometimes they're a roadblock and a waste of money towards more direct spending, and that we elect people to make these decisions. You might not ultimately like the decisions they make about where money goes, and certainly there should be some input there. But for instance, on this task force, are you really going to find consensus here among this task force on where this money should go? I recall in the days after George Floyd was killed, and the protests were very big. You might recall when there was this big protest at City Hall, and the mayor invited some community leaders up to the 7th floor to have this sort of roundtable conversation. And things got really heated in there. No one agreed on the path forward for the city. And there was such differing opinions. And so I wonder, on this task force, is that going to be the sort of same thing? And at the end of this, I don't know that there's anything the task force could do or that the mayor could do that would please everyone in the situation, that would put this money out there in a way that everyone is happy with. And so I just sort of wonder, I do think task forces have a tendency to be window dressing. And so you have to kind of, I guess, when it's done, look back and dissect it, I guess, and figure out, is this the result that everyone wanted? And also keep in mind, the task force costs money. All of this is going to eventually cost money, and that's just taking away from money that you could be putting into communities in the first place. And it costs time as well. So I'm always skeptical of a task force.
So can I jump in here?
Yeah, sure.
And respectfully part ways with my colleague Brandi. I mean, I just want to stick up for task force here for a second. I mean, you've had some pretty big things decided by task forces in Seattle. I mean, the $15 minimum wage, that was the force that Ed Murray and panel to come up with the procedures and the schedules and all the rest. I mean, it would have been hard to actually implement if you not had a task force that kind of started the process and created the community buy-in. I remember during Greg Nichols' administration, there was a very important task force impaneled on police accountability, chaired, I think, by Jenny Durkan. And there were a lot of police reforms. I mean, sort of not enough in retrospect, but there were many police reforms. I know they came up with, I'm going to say 35 recommendations. They were all implemented. They certainly moved the ball forward. You've had task forces on the waterfront, different things. So I think task forces actually, it's not that they can't be window dressing, but they're actually a pretty good way of trying to take the decision out of kind of the typical city hall players, council, mayor, and get as many stakeholders involved. You don't necessarily have unanimity. I mean, I agree with Brandi, but I'm not sure you need that. I mean, the $15 minimum wage, I believe, was not a unanimous recommendation. Sometimes you have minority reports from a task force, and that's fine. But
okay, Marcus, you also wanted to react.
Yeah, I mean, I might get dragged on Twitter, but I gotta agree with Brandi on this one too. I mean,
why are you gonna get dragged on Twitter for that?
No, but I mean, I think the devil is in the details, and you have to look at the task force and the composition as well. And look, I'm not saying that I don't think this task force can be influential and have certainly an outsized impact and influence on where this money is going. But I think one of the things that at least I haven't seen reported is like how many of these task force members actually even live in Seattle. I know many of them operate organizations that are in Seattle, with some, even if you just cross-check a couple of, voter registrations, don't actually live here in the city. And I think that kind of also highlights the fact some of the things that are plaguing this the Black community and BIPOC communities now in Seattle as well is like, even if you spend this $100 million in 2 or 3 years, who in the world is going to be here? And when I say who is going to be here, meaning those in the Black community is going to actually be here to benefit, from this investment. So I have to say, I'm not sure if, this is going to be something that is actually all that effective in the long run.
Okay, we'll follow that together. Some of the groups, since I haven't mentioned any specifics, that are on this task force: Seattle King County, NAACP, United Indians of All Tribes, El Centro de la Raza, First AME Church, Refugee Women's Alliance, Seattle Chinatown International District Preservation and Development Authority. It's a long list beyond that, but we'll see what happens. King County Equity Now, not on the list. Seattle King County Black Lives Matter, not on the list. It's going to be very, very interesting, and the city council will weigh in as well. Let's pause and return to our election ballot when we come back. Turns out the second in command in Washington State doesn't live here. That and more when we return.
Week in Review will continue in a minute on 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. The World Health Organization is warning that hospitals in a number of European cities could be overwhelmed by rising coronavirus infections within the next few weeks. You'll hear more about that this afternoon during BBC NewsHour, which begins at 1 p.m.
Support for KUOW comes from King Conservation District, empowering residents to help build a more climate-resilient King County through Orca Recovery Day, a month-long opportunity to take actions that can help the waters, salmon, and orca. More at kingcd.org, helping build better ground.
61 degrees in Seattle. Rain considered likely this afternoon with a high of 64. Chance of rain sticks with us overnight. Tomorrow expected to be mostly cloudy. It's 12:25, and we return to KUOW's Week in Review.
This is Bill Radke with our Week in Review panel from the South Seattle Emerald and the Seattle Times, Marcus Green, and from Q13, correspondent Brandi Kruse, and from Q13, political analyst C.R. Douglas.
We're taking over your show this week, Bill.
Taking over your 50% and on the move. This week, and by the way, that maybe that's a good thing, because they know from visuals, and you can watch the show. You can watch 4 talking heads, 4 or 5, on facebook.com/KUOW Public Radio, youtube.com/user/KUOW949. Counting my windows there. Okay, so this week, KUOW's Olympia correspondent Austin Jenkins told us that Washington State's Lieutenant Governor, Cyrus Habib, has left the state to train to become a Jesuit priest.
Habib had previously said that he was planning to go into the priesthood, and that's why he wasn't seeking re-election. But it was not widely known that as of September 1st, the Democrat was taking an unpaid leave of absence so that he could begin his religious training in California.
A spokesperson for Habib says the lieutenant governor is checking in several times a week and approves documents that go out with his signature, but he's not running the office day to day. Habib is first in line to replace the governor if Inslee were to become incapacitated. CR, why is the second in command allowed to just leave?
I think it's a great question. And I think he should have resigned. I don't think you should be able to just go to another state. I mean, part of being second in command is that you need to be like present, right? This isn't a virtual thing. When the governor is out of the state, you are automatically acting governor. Inslee's probably not out of state as much now during COVID, but that requires you to kind of just be around, right? Part of your requirement is that you be there. There's nothing in law that ultimately requires that. It's up to voters, deciding, to recall that person, or the legislature to impeach this person if they think if it's an egregious kind of abandonment of duties. But he wasn't going to run for re-election. You're talking about 3 or 4 months of this year, and so it's kind of moot. If this was the first year of his term, I guarantee you there would be moves to push him to resign, or maybe even a recall, or maybe even an impeachment proceeding.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marcus.
I was going to say, like, CR, I wanted to ask, I mean, is Cyrus just saying, hey, everybody's working remotely now with COVID-19, so I mean, I can do it in California? Or I guess what's some of the thinking that behind him being sort of okay with being in California and serving in this capacity?
Yeah, I mean, that he has said through his spokesman that he sounds like he's participating in whatever meetings he needs to, and he's signing documents if he needs to. So he's in touch, and theoretically you can be in touch from your home office or from a California office, but I think this is a breach of trust. I mean, I don't think voters, elect someone assuming they're going to leave the state. Certainly not for a high office like this.
Yeah, and he clearly doesn't care because he's not being reelected. He's not going to be a politician anymore. He could have at least done the voters, given them the courtesy of coming out and saying, hey, this is the decision that I've made. Thank you for allowing me to serve you for X amount of years, and I'm going to go to California and pursue this next chapter in my life. A little odd that it happened so quietly. The other thing I think it shows that nobody noticed is, do we really need a lieutenant governor? There are many states that do not have a lieutenant governor. They don't. And so I think that's a realistic question as well. And when Governor Inslee was off on the 2020 campaign trail, there were many times that the lieutenant governor was not available to serve as the acting governor. So the Secretary of State did, even the treasurer did. And so there is always going to be an executive person in a position to be able to fill in. Even when the governor just had a really simple surgery, there was somebody who was serving as acting governor. And that's really the most important, thing, is there somebody available to make a decision if the governor is not able to? And so to me, no one noticed he was gone since September 1st. Maybe we don't need a lieutenant governor after all.
This brings us to our ballot. Do we know who's going to replace? I know the answer is that we don't yet know, because the lieutenant governor campaign or election is on the ballot that you ought to have in your hands by now. So what do we know about lieutenant governor?
Well, we know it's kind of an interesting race because it's two Democrats, Mark Elias and Denny Heck. So it's not a typical Republican-Democrat race. It's getting a little bit higher profile this year than it would have because, this kind of this weird possibility that Inslee may leave, and join a Biden administration. So if the governorship is vacant, then the lieutenant governor, that's really the prime duty of a lieutenant governor, right? Is they not just fill in if the governor's out of the state or in a surgery, but like if the governor either dies or is incapacitated, resigns, or gets appointed, you really do need a clear second in command. I mean, it is kind of a holding pattern position. It's kind of like the vice presidency. They don't have a ton of duties, although I will say they do preside over the state Senate. So would be noticeably, his absence would have been noticed if this was during a legislative session. It happens to not be. That doesn't start till the first of the year. So he could sort of hide his way in California for at least a while, but that was going to not last forever. He was going to get noticed.
Well, as Brandi told us, there are other ways to have a second in command besides a lieutenant governor, however other states do it. But I want to talk about some of, we have a ballot full, see, right here. I haven't even filled it out, so nobody can screenshot my ballot and know how I voted, but you should have your ballot too. And CR, you mentioned these are two Democrats running for lieutenant governor. That's somewhat rare. You know what else is rare is a statewide official in Washington State who is a Republican. And we have one and have had for a long time in the position of Secretary of State. Would you tell us about that race this year?
Yeah, it's on the ballot as it is every 4 years. Incumbent Kim Wyman, a Republican, moderate Republican, running for her third term against a challenger who's a Democratic state legislator, Gail Tarleton. You know, what's interesting is that every 4 years, Democrats try and make this a partisan race. I mean, this year, Gail Tarleton's, talking about Trump and, kind of all the big national buzz points.
May I play an example of that and then let you
Sure,
continue? Yeah. Here's a Gail Tarleton campaign ad.
I'm Gail Tarleton. I'm running for Secretary of State to elections. I'm a Democrat and Kim Wyman is a Republican, but defending our democracy from Donald Trump shouldn't be about party. After our elections were attacked, Wyman sided with Trump Republicans who opposed enhanced election security. When Trump sabotaged our postal service to rig this election, Wyman said, "My job isn't to take on the president. I'm Gail Tarleton. I'm not afraid of Donald Trump. And as your Secretary of State, I'll stand up for our elections."
Let's not make this about party, but let's make it about Donald Trump.
Yeah, you can see why the Democrats use that playbook, because it works very well for them and has, meaning the partisan playbook in statewide elections for years, for governor, for these big offices, governor, senator, AG. I mean, they win these partisan fights. But this is a nonpartisan job, in a lot of ways. It's an election administrator job. It doesn't have, portfolio that deals with, taxes or abortion or, gun control. I mean, none of the sort of partisan things come into play here. And Republicans have just usually offered up an election administrator. She happens to be a former Thurston County auditor, Kim Wyman. The previous one was. I mean, they offer up these people who have a background in the very thing, and Democrats typically offer up, a more partisan voice, and it just hasn't worked for Democrats. This state doesn't want it to be a partisan office. This state has elected basically a moderate Republican for over 50 years. Non-ideologues and many with elections experience. And it just seems to me if Democrats want to get this office at some point, instead of making this a partisan fight, they ought to offer up an election administrator of their own. I mean, one of these county auditors that's a Democrat, or one of these, county election officials, and sort of do an apples to apples race to Kim Wyman. It just seems like the other way has not been working for 50 years. So why not try and actually offer up someone for whom the job is really suited?
Okay, shall we move on to spotlight some of the other bubbles?
One thought on the Secretary of State's race, just because, I think we have to acknowledge we have an election system to be proud of. I see the video out of Georgia with Americans waiting in line for 8 hours to cast a vote. I don't know that there's anything more un-American than that. And so the Democrats have to be careful, because they want people to have confidence in our system, but they also want to tear down the head of our election system in order to beat her. And so it's a very delicate line they have to balance between how critical they are of the person who runs our elections and how they make sure that they're not actually hurting voter confidence in what is, a pretty sound election system that we have in our state.
Okay. Let's pick another race. A campaign, a vote that was a big deal in 2018, this swing congressional district that straddles the Cascades with a political newcomer coming into office. I haven't heard that much about the 8th district in this particular election. Brandi, will you catch us up?
Well, Bill, you haven't been watching Q13. We talk about it all the time.
That's a lie. I watch nothing else.
Look, to me, this is still a swing district. It was a Republican district. It had always been a Republican district. It's been a Democratic district for not even 2 years. And so to me, you can't label a Democrat for a few more years. I think Kim Schreier would have to have a few more terms under her belt for it to lose that moniker. And I just think it's a fascinating district because I think it's one of the only congressional districts where really the moderates are going to rule the day, and they're going to decide this election. Moderates' voices are shut out by the fringes too often. And I think it really is the more moderate voters in the 8th who are going to decide who wins. And so to me, it's fascinating and could really go either way. You know, Kim Schreier underperformed in the primary. She got 43% as an incumbent. Combined Republicans on the ballot in the primary got more votes than her. Now the turnout's going to be higher in the general, but I would say it's certainly not a sure thing for Dr. Kim Schreier.
She may be helped by I keep hearing about a Democratic wave. We'll see about that. That certainly would bode well for the incumbent. And Marcus, you are focused on a King County charter, which also doesn't get all the attention in the world, especially in a year like this. Why is this King County charter important to you?
Yes, well, it's King County Charter Amendment 5.
Amendment is what I mean. Yes.
Yes, which we, and you obviously don't read the Emerald enough either, and you need to watch Q13 more and read the Emerald more, obviously. Anyhow, though, yeah. So this is a charter amendment that would essentially it's voting. Voters would go to the polls to change over to potentially change over the King County Sheriff's position from being one that is now voted on by King County voters to one that is appointed by the King County Council and King County Executive. This is a position that has been voted on by voters since 1996. One of the main reasons that at that time people said that it needed to be voted on as opposed to an appointment process was for it to have more, for the King County Sheriff to have more accountability to the residents of King County. That's now the same argument, ironically enough, that is being used to why some people want to go back to an appointment process. It's one of these situations where we're now in this time period where people are looking for, reckonings and more police accountability and so on and so forth, where I think I'm not sure that this is maybe necessarily the most thought out, quite frankly, in terms of wanting to make this an appointed position. I just don't see how having a position that has where you're sort of stripping or taking away democracy and more power of the people to appoint who is essentially at the head of the King County Sheriff's Department I just don't see how that potentially produces more accountability for the King County Sheriff than if this is a person who's voted on by voters. So,
okay. Any other takes on King County Sheriff appointed versus elected?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Marcus, I won't get trolled on Twitter for saying I agree with you.
Well,
well, who knows? I might. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I don't understand why having politicians pick what amounts to a politician and a sheriff. I know that they say that they're not political, but they are. Why that makes any sense in the world. I know that obviously if you're elected sheriff, unless the people try to bring up another vote, if something major happens, you don't just get kicked out. So I guess if there were to be in the middle of a term some sort of serious incident or pattern of incidents, it would give the King County Council more power to be able to remove that person if it were something egregious, and maybe be able to do it a little bit quicker. But, I know the county has changed a lot, and this is what I go back to on task forces. We elect people to make decisions, and sometimes we have to live with the consequence of the person we elected because they don't turn out to be what we thought. But that's why you get another turn to vote. And so that's why when I say with task forces, you elected someone, let them make decisions. And if you don't like those decisions, you turn around and you take them out of office.
Unless they're Supreme Court justices.
Unless they're a Supreme Court justice.
All right. CR, anything to add, or should we roll on?
I think we can roll on.
Cover it? Okay. Talking about the ballot that you ought to have in your hot little hands by now. This is the week in review, and we are going to continue. In fact, we were just talking about the sheriff's office, where we will discuss some sheriff misconduct and maybe a wave of farewells from Seattle police officers and more when we return on the week in review.
94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:42.
There we go.
Support for KUOW comes from neighborhood Fred Meyer stores, providing fresh food and the ability to personalize shopping on the Fred Meyer app or in store. Fred Meyer, fresh for everyone.
I'm James Kamarasamy, host of BBC NewsHour. Coming up today, as the British Prime Minister says, prepare for no post-Brexit trade deal. Our hopes for an amicable divorce between the UK and EU at an end. And Mexico's former defense minister is charged with drug trafficking.
That's BBC NewsHour this afternoon at 1 o'clock, just about 17 minutes away. 94.9 KUOW, Seattle. We return to KUOW's Week in Review.
I'm Bill Radke. We're reviewing the week's news with C.R. Douglas and Brandi Kruse from Q13 and Marcus Green, Seattle Times columnist, founder of South Seattle Emerald. This week, the King County Sheriff's Office came down hard on a detective who appeared to mock civil rights and racial justice protesters. KUOW reporter Amy Radel says as two protesters lay in critical condition after being hit by a driver, Detective Mike Brown posted a drawing that says all lives splatter.
The sheriff's office received hundreds of complaints about Brown's Facebook post mocking the protesters who were hit by a speeding car on I-5 on July 4th. The incident killed one protester and seriously injured another. But the investigation listed a total of 7 posts that mocked protests against racial injustice and police brutality. In one, Brown wrote of the protesters, "When in doubt, knock them out," and suggested police should retaliate for the occupation outside Seattle's East Precinct.
This week, the sheriff's second in command recommended that Brown be fired for conduct unbecoming, among other counts. Who wants to tell us about the case of Mike Brown and why this is interesting this week?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, it feels like it was not even a difficult case. I mean, I expect the sheriff will uphold that recommendation to fire him. It brings up the whole issue of social media and, you know, what officers, but in some ways just all public employees are allowed and not allowed to do. I mean, where does the First Amendment kind of come to an end when you're talking about someone who's a cop online, if you will? And the rules are pretty clear that you know, if you are posting stuff on social media or elsewhere that would reflect poorly on the department and put into jeopardy its ability to render impartial justice, both as a department and as you as an individual officer, that you've crossed the line. And, you know, we've seen this happen in Seattle where, you know, and I'm sure cases all across the country as social media has exploded, you know, a lot of police officers are on it and many have crossed the line. And I think this is an example of just that.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Marcus.
Oh, please, Brandi, go ahead.
I mean, not fit. He's not fit. You know, that's the simplest way I can put it. And it's not just about posts that demean people calling for justice. It's about posts that encourage violence. You're a police officer. You get a badge and a gun, and you're supposed to protect people. And my thought would be, how can you be so dumb? But, you know, and I know people, you know, accuse me of being too lenient on the police, but, you know, repeatedly when there's been examples of this, to me, it's been clear. You know, and this is somebody who said what he was thinking out loud, right? There's probably a lot of other members of law enforcement, not a lot, but some, just as there are in any profession, who think these things quietly to themselves. And he was just dumb enough to put it on social media, and he's going to lose his job over it. But when you have an incident where you have like these two people who one lost their life and one was clinging to their life, and you show that level of disregard for human life and disrespect. I mean, what else do you say about that? I don't know if there's anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, other than this is just the height of stupidity. I believe even as it was quoted in the interview that he did with the investigator, Detective Mike Brown said that this was a poor attempt at humor. I mean, how in the world is anybody dying, the taking of any human life in the realm of humor? And I mean, I think this just goes to show you why there is a mistrust with law enforcement.
Yeah, and I'll add just an example to that. There was a sergeant, I believe, with SPD who got caught on video kind of running up on a sidewalk during the protests, narrowly missed protesters. And then he sits and has this conversation with the person filming them. And he's telling them, Seattle is dirty and gross. I get paid $200,000 a year to babysit you guys. And I said, is Seattle a little gross in places and dirty? Yeah, it is. Does he get paid a lot of money in overtime to deal with protesters? Yeah, he does. Should he have said it out loud? No, he shouldn't have. And he's going to face the consequences for that. You can think it to yourself, but you have to maintain professionalism no matter, how you're feeling about a situation. So I don't understand the mindset of a law enforcement officer who would do that. And mind you, at a time when they're under so much scrutiny and where it has been a difficult time for SPD in the city during all of this, they have been targeted numerous times. You only make their job more difficult by doing something like that.
Well, I suppose it could also be enlightening when somebody says what they're thinking and says it out loud. Yes, CR.
I just want to jump in and zoom out a little bit on just the larger issue of accountability that this generates. It looks like the right thing's going to happen here, and the processes kind of worked, but that's not a guarantee with King County. I mean, the King County Sheriff's Office does not have near the oversight infrastructure that the SPD has. I mean, they haven't been part of a consent decree. They haven't had to do any of that. They don't have independent investigations. They don't have an equivalent of the Office of Professional Accountability like SPD does. They don't have a civilian auditor. There is a system that has been developed in Seattle, which is not perfect by any means, but is light years ahead of anything that King County has. And in some ways, it's remarkable that there hasn't been more attention given to that and more problems, really. I think we've probably been lucky, but my guess is that it's a bit of a ticking time bomb at King County, how far behind they are in just the accountability issues in this day and age. I should add in, as part of that, they don't have body cams, they don't have dash cams in their car. I mean, it's a real problem.
Well, and I'll just say to quickly add on to CR's point, right? I mean, the King County Sheriff's Office is being sued now by the family of Tommy Lee, an Asian American man who was killed by King County Sheriff's deputies under what they are saying is very suspicious circumstances, and their family is saying that the account of the sheriff's deputies does not align up with that of the witnesses and so on and so forth who were there when and other evidence with the death of Tommy Lee. So yeah, just to underscore what CR was saying, I mean, the KCSO is under fire right now for a lack of accountability.
Yeah, and I just want to add quick, I don't want to dismiss, and I do think it's a slippery slope to be policing what people put on their social media. There has to be a freedom of speech element to share your personal and political beliefs, but as a police officer, sharing something that suggests that you condone violence against other humans crosses a line. And so to me, it's hard to figure out, is it clear, cut and dry, what is acceptable to share of your personal beliefs? But, violence is not an opinion. And so, it's just a clear case of someone unfit.
As we move toward the end of the week in review for this week, we move back in a way to COVID because last month, you may remember, high school football players from around Washington asked the governor to let school sports resume this fall. They had a petition, 20,000 signatures plus. Kennedy High School's star quarterback, Sam Heward, you might recognize that name from Husky quarterback Damon Heward if you've lived here a while. Sam said that this postponed season could lead to youth depression, volatile situations at home, and, by the way, an inability to potentially earn a college scholarship. One football coach, a sports trainer, found a way around that. Marcus, he did an end around. Will you tell us what happened?
Yeah, so Tracy Ford, he's a 34-year-old football trainer, former strength coach at former powerhouse Bellevue High School. He decided to go ahead and stick the proverbial middle finger to some of the COVID-19 safety protocols and decided to host not one, but 3 different events. One was a Labor Day football tournament. Another one was an October 4th 8-year-old and under football game. And then the other was a couple weeks ago, was a 3-day mini camp for 112 top football prospects in the state. And he again argued that, hey, these kids, they need to be seen by scouts and so forth. They need to have film so that, college recruiters can see them, and this can, sort of be their ticket to potentially to a scholarship. And unfortunately, though, he's doing this in the midst of a pandemic when public health officials, and especially in public health officials in Tacoma, where he held one of these events, literally the day before, they had said that there's been a surge and drastic uptick in COVID cases within the Tacoma Pierce County area. We know that public health officials are also saying right now, just here in King County, that on average we're getting 140 new cases per day, and they're also saying that by February 1st. Most likely we'll see double the amount of deaths that we've experienced in this state. Again, I mean, I just think that this is extremely irresponsible. I've been a high school football player. I was a horrendous one, and so I wouldn't have been invited to this camp. But I understand the enthusiasm that these kids have. That being said, you have adults here who are supposed to inhibit bad behavior, not encourage it, especially in the midst of COVID. And unfortunately, this seems to be one of those incidents where they just don't care. You have these mass gatherings of 400 some odd people who went to some of these camps and these games, creating a situation where people could get infected and potentially, increase these numbers more drastically.
And that trainer's saying it's an outdoor activity. It can be done safely. The Seahawks haven't had any positive tests so far, right?
No, the Seahawks haven't, but certainly NFL football teams have. There's the Titans, there's the Patriots. There's also been, COVID cases with college football. Nick Saban, he's the who my father hates to death. Yes, but anyway, he's the college football coach of the number 2 ranked Crimson Tide of at the University of Alabama. He just got infected. I mean, in the NFL and college, these are places and entities that have millions of dollars in resources to potentially try and protect their players. This is this case is a high school football coach high school football trainer, where the district, the state, nobody is, behind him at all. And so he's just doing this and sort of unilaterally, come what may.
Okay, well, since Republicans have told us that Governor Inslee is a madman COVID-19 dictator, I assume this trainer and all the participants are in jail?
You would assume wrong. Tracy Lee, who is a spokesperson for the governor's office, when sort of asked about this violation, has said essentially that they're going to leave it to the local law enforcement, and kind of threw Seattle a bit under the bus when they say, we're leaving it to local law enforcement to do it. And some local law enforcement and some local municipalities have decided not to, enforce these laws, and sort of pointed to the gatherings in Seattle. And it just doesn't appear that this this trainer, Mr. Ford, is going to face any repercussions.
Okay, any other reaction?
I would just say that there's been a lot of large gatherings by a lot of different groups of people during the pandemic. Okay, so let's not pretend that there haven't been. That being said,
Yes.
I never think it's a good idea to teach kids, especially impressionable young adults, that they're above the rules. And I don't know that that's a good lesson to send them off with in a college career.
Bill, one thing I would just say is I would be surprised if this continues after the huge story in the Seattle Times brought this to everyone's attention. I mean, it's going to be very hard to ignore this. He was probably kind of doing this under the radar. Now, with this being out so much, someone's going to crack down on it.
Well, I will say, I mean, he was freely, marketing this on social media. So, I mean, I don't think that he was trying to hide this at all. I will say, yeah, I guess I would be surprised if he, if he doesn't somehow modify these in some way or try to, keep them somewhat under the radar if he does continue to do them.
Okay,
I just think the press attention now is,
etc. Watch what happens.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just think the press attention now is such that he's going to be under scrutiny just inevitably.
All right, we have inevitably come to the end of the program. I have time. We can quickly say something that's making us smile. I just want to say there's so much fretting about the holiday. There's no Halloween. We can't bob for apples. Kids can't move in big groups and take candy from strangers. But wait, what is Halloween supposed to be about? Dead people. And you know who's outdoors and 6 feet apart? Dead people. So the Hillside Cemetery in Issaquah is hosting a nighttime tour. That's right. During a pandemic, you will walk among graves with candles and learn about life and death in Issaquah. So thank you, Hillside Cemetery, for keeping it real, disturbingly real, this year at Halloween. Anybody else?
What a weird way to end the show, Bill.
Weird.
How morbid. Wow.
Can I say what's making me happy, Bill? It's unambiguously happy. I have, for the first time ever, planted lavender. I never plant anything. And I have planted lavender, and every morning I go out, sometimes twice a day, and I'll just go by the lavender plant, grab a couple of the petals and kind of squeeze them between my hands and smell it. And that is kind of just a little moment of bliss.
Yes, you're in the south of France. Yep, Brandi's holding her ballot.
I'm blocking my address, but yeah, my ballot's making me happy. It's been quite the year, but probably the worst of my life. But this is our lifeline, and it's really the only thing we have control over. So it's nice to get a little opportunity to give some letter grades, so to speak, to our politicians. So I'm looking forward to filling that out this weekend. I hope everybody else does too.
Thank you. I hear the goodbye music. Marcus, are you smiling this week?
I am, and I'm smiling because my favorite coffee shop in South Seattle, the station in Beacon Hill, is seeing an outpouring of support from folks, Liana and Luis Rodriguez, who are the owners of the establishment. They posted on their Facebook that they needed some support to help with not closing. I mean, they have also been reeling from COVID-19, and so many folks from the community have come in and said, hey, we love you, we're going to do this. So there you go.
Great. I know the station. Marcus Green, C.R. Douglas, Brandi, Kruse. Great to see you. Thanks for being our Weekend Review panel.
Thanks for having us.
From Q13 and South Seattle Emerald and Seattle Times. And I'm Bill Radke for KUOW.